Welcome, everyone. Thank you very much for coming together to immerse ourselves in this rich body of wisdom we call Torah. We are going to read through this week's Torah portion in English translation. That is Parshat Terumah in the book of Exodus, beginning with chapter 25, verse 1. And I'll share with you the opening verses, and then I'll provide others an opportunity to read as well. And then I'll share with you my reaction to this week's Torah portion, and then we'll have our conversation about it. If you'd like to join me in reciting a blessing, giving thanks for this moment, feel free to do so. Baruch
atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asot b'divrei Torah. Amen.
Thank you, God, for the opportunity to immerse ourselves in words and deeds and relationships of Torah. This is again in the book of Exodus, chapter 25, verse 1. God spoke to Moses, saying, "Tell the Israelite people to bring me gifts. You shall accept gifts for me from every person whose heart so moves them. And these are the gifts that you shall accept from them: gold, silver, and copper, blue, purple, and crimson yarns, fine linen, goat's hair, tan ram skins, dolphin skins, and acacia wood, oil for lighting, spices for the anointing oil and for the aromatic incense, lapis lazuli and other stones for setting, for the ephod and for the breastpiece. And let them make me a sanctuary, that I may dwell among them, exactly as I show you, the pattern of the tabernacle and the pattern of all its furnishings. So shall you make it." Richard, we're at verse 10.
Thank you, Ellen. You shall make an ark of acacia wood, 2.5 cubits long, 1.5 cubits wide, and 1.5 cubits high. Overlay with pure gold, overlay inside and out, and make upon it a gold molding round about. Cast 4 gold rings for it, to be attached to its 4 feet, 2 rings on one of its side walls and 2 on the other. Make the poles of acacia wood and overlay them with gold. Then insert the poles into the rings on the side walls of the ark for carrying the ark. The poles shall remain in the rings of the ark. They shall not be removed from it, and deposit it in the ark, the tablets of the pact which I will give you.
Thank you, Richard. Margot, would you like to read a little bit? We're at verse 17.
Thank you, Rabbi. You shall make a cover of pure gold, 2.5 cubits long and 1.5 cubits wide. Make 2 cherub of gold. Make them of hammered work, and the 2 ends of hammered work at the 2 ends of the cover. Make 1 cherub at one end and the other at the other end. All of one piece of material to cover them, and they shall make the cherub, and they shall confront each other's the faces of the cherubs being turned toward the cover. Place the cover over the top of the ark and deposit inside the ark the pact that I will give you. There I will meet with you, and I will impart to you from above the cover, from between the 2 cherubs, the top that are at the top of the ark of the pact, and all that I will command you concerning the Israelites people.
Thank you, Margot. Dave, we're at verse 23 now, if you'd like to read.
Okay. You shall make a table of acacia wood, 2 cubits long, 1 cubit wide, and 1.5 cubits high. Overlay it with pure gold and make a gold molding around it. Make a rim of a hand's breadth around it and make a gold molding for its rim round about. Make 4 gold rings for it and attach the rings to the 4 corners at its 4 legs. The rings shall be next to the rim as holders for poles to carry the table. Make the poles of acacia wood and overlay them with gold by those the table shall be carried. Make its bowls, ladles, jars, and jugs with which to offer libations. Make them of pure gold. And on the table you shall set the bread of display to be before me always.
Okay. Rose, we're at verse 31, if you'd like to read a little bit.
Okay. 31.
Yes.
Okay. You shall make a lampstand of pure gold. The lampstand shall be made of hammered work. Its base and its shaft, its cups, calices, and petals shall be of one piece. 6 branches shall issue from its sides, 3 branches from one side of the lampstand and 3 branches from the other side of the lampstand. On one branch there shall be 3 cups shaped like almond blossoms, each with calyx and petals, and on the next branch there shall be 3 cups shaped like almond blossoms, each with calyx and petals, so for all the 6 branches issuing from the lampstand. And on the lampstand itself there shall be 4 cups shaped like almond blossoms, each with calyx and petals, a calyx of one piece with it under a pair of branches, and a calyx of one piece with it under the second pair of branches, and a calyx of one piece with it under the last pair of branches, so for all 6 branches issued from the lampstand. The calyxes and their stems shall be of one piece with it, the whole of it a single hammered piece of pure gold. Make it 7 lamps. The lamps shall be so mounted as to give the light on its front side. Note well and follow the plans for them that are being shown you on the mountain.
Thank you so much. And Jim, we're now at the very start of chapter 26, if you'd like to read a bit.
Thank you, Rabbi. As for the tabernacle, make it of 10 strips of cloth. Make these of fine twisted linen of blue, purple, and crimson yarns, with the design of cherubim worked into them. The length of each cloth shall be 28 cubits, and the width of each cloth shall be 4 cubits, all the cloths to have the same measurements. 5 of the cloths shall be joined to one another, and the other 5 cloths shall be joined to one another. Make loops of blue wool on the edge of the outermost cloth of the one set, and do likewise on the edge of the outermost cloth of the other set. Make 50 loops on the one cloth and 50 loops on the edge of the end of cloth of the other set, the loops to be opposite one another. And make 50 gold clasps and couple the cloths to one another with the clasps, so the tabernacle becomes one whole.
Thank you, Jim. And Linda and Justin, we're now at verse 7 of chapter 26, if you'd like to read.
Thank you, Rabbi. Verse 7.
And then you shall make curtains of goat hair for a tent over the Mishkan. You shall make 11 curtains. The length of one curtain shall be 30 cubits, and the width of one curtain 4 cubits, the same measure for the 11 curtains. And you shall join the 5 curtains by themselves, and the other 6 curtains by themselves. And you shall fold the 6th curtain before the front of the tent, and you shall make 50 loops on the edge of one curtain, which is at the edge of the first set, and 50 loops on the edge of the outermost curtain of the second set. And you shall make 50 copper clasps. You shall bring the clasps into the loops, and you shall fasten the tent together so that it will become one. And the overhanging excess in the curtains of the tent, half of the extra curtain, shall hang over the rear of the Mishkan.
And the cubit from here and the cubit from there of the excess in the length of the curtains of the tent shall hang over the sides of the Mishkan from here and from there to cover it. And you shall make a covering for the tent of ram skins dyed red, and a covering of tachash skins above. And you shall make the planks for the Mishkan of acacia wood, upright. 10 cubits shall be the length of each plank, and a cubit and a half shall be the width of each plank. Each plank shall have 2 square pegs, rung like, one even with the other, so that you shall make all the planks of the Mishkan. And you shall make the planks for the Mishkan, 20 planks for the southern side. And you shall make 40 silver sockets under the 20 planks, 2 sockets under one plank, for its 2 square pegs, and 2 sockets under one plank for its 2 square pegs. And for the second side of the Mishkan on the northern side, 20 planks. And there are 40 silver sockets, 2 sockets under one plank, and 2 sockets under one plank. And for the western end of the Mishkan you shall make 6 planks. You shall make 2 planks at the corners of the Mishkan at the end. And they shall be matched evenly from below, and together they shall match at its top, to be put into one ring. So shall it be for both of them. They shall be for the 2 corners. And there shall be 8 planks, and their silver sockets, 16 sockets, 2 sockets under one plank, and 2 sockets under one plank.
Well, thank you so much. And Robert, we're now at verse 26 of chapter 26, if you'd like to read a bit.
Yes, thank you. And thou shalt make bars of shittim wood, 5 for the boards of the one side of the tabernacle, and 5 bars for the boards of the other side of the tabernacle, and 5 bars for the boards of the side of the tabernacle, for the 2 sides westward. And the middle bar in the midst of the board shall reach from end to end. And thou shalt overlay the boards with gold, and make their rings of gold for places for the bars. And thou shalt overlay the bars with gold. And thou shalt rear up the tabernacle according to the fashion thereof, which was showed thee in the mount. And thou shalt make a veil of blue and purple and scarlet, and fine twined linen of cunning work. With cherubims shall it be made. And thou shalt hang it upon 4 pillars of shittim wood, overlaid with gold. Their hooks shall be of gold, upon the 4 sockets of silver. And thou shalt hang up the veil under the taches, that thou mayest bring in thither within the veil, the ark of the testimony. And the veil shall divide unto you between the holy place and the most holy. And thou shalt put the mercy seat upon the ark of the testimony in the most holy place. And thou shalt set the table without the veil, and the candlestick over against the table on the side of the tabernacle toward the south. And thou shalt put the table on the north side. And thou shalt make an hanging for the door of the tent of blue and purple and scarlet and fine twined linen, wrought with needlework. And thou shalt make for the hanging 5 pillars of shittim wood, and overlay them with gold, and their hooks shall be of gold, and thou shalt cast 5 sockets of brass for them.
Thank you so much. Catherine, we're at the very start of chapter 27, if you'd like to read a bit.
Thank you, Rabbi. You shall make the altar of acacia wood, 5 cubits long and 5 cubits wide. The altar is to be square. and 3 cubits high. Make the horns on the 4 corners, the horns to be of one piece with it, and overlay it with copper. Make the pails for removing its ashes, as well as its scrapers, basins, flesh hooks, and fire pans. Make all its utensils of copper. Make for it a grating of mesh work in copper. And on the mesh, make 4 copper rings at its 4 corners. Set the mesh below under the ledge of the altar so that it extends to the middle of the altar. And make poles for the altar, poles of acacia wood, and overlay them with copper. The poles shall be inserted into the rings so that the poles remain on the 2 sides of the altar when it is carried. Make it hollow of boards, as you were shown on the mountain, so they shall be made.
All right. Carl, would you like to read a little bit? We're at verse 9 of chapter 27.
Shall make the enclosure of the tabernacle. On the south side, 100 cubits of hanging of fine twined linen for the length of the enclosure on that side, with its 20 posts and their 20 sockets of copper, the hooks and bands of the posts to be of silver. Again, 100 cubits of hangings for its length along the north side, with its 20 posts and their 20 sockets of copper, the hooks and bands of the posts to be of silver. For the width of the enclosure, on the west side, 50 cubits of hangings with their 10 posts and their 10 sockets. For the width of the enclosure on the front, or the east side, 50 cubits. 15 cubits of hangings on the one flank with their 3 posts and their 3 sockets. 15 cubits of hangings on the other flank with their 3 posts and their 3 sockets. And for the gate of the enclosure, a screen of 20 cubits of blue, purple, and crimson yarns, and fine twisted linen done in embroidery with their 4 posts and 4 sockets. All of the posts round the enclosure shall be banded with silver, and their hooks shall be of silver. The sockets shall be of copper. The length of the enclosure shall be 100 cubits, and the width 50 throughout, and the height 5 cubits, with hangings, of fine twisted linen. The sockets shall be of copper. All the utensils of the tabernacle for all its service, as well as all its pegs and all its and all the pegs of the court shall be of copper.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. That's our entire Torah portion for the week. And so in this portion, which we've been reading, it's focusing on the construction of this Mishkan, this sanctuary, and it introduces into our reading something that we really haven't encountered that much before, which is a lot of color, a lot of rich materials. And next week in Parshat Tetzaveh, we'll see that carried over from the construction of a building to the design of beautiful garments that are to be worn by the priest, again, using rich colors and rich materials. So if we were to follow the chronological linear order of what's been happening in our Torah readings over the last couple of weeks and this week and next week following, what we have is this moment at Mount Sinai where there is what we call the revelation of God's voice, the revelation of Torah, the revelation of these 10 utterances, sometimes called the 10 Commandments. And then with Parshat Mishpatim, which we read last week, we have more detailed laws and decrees and protocols that are being issued. And now we have this construction project to create this sanctuary space. And then next week, we'll have the design of the clothing that's to be worn by those who are responsible for leading the service in this sanctuary space. And then in 2 weeks' time, we'll come to Parshat Ki Tisa, where is the infamous moment of the creation of the golden calf that's worshipped. So to look at that flow, one way of looking at it is that at this moment of Mount Sinai, people are presented with, first of all, this presence of God breaking through the barriers that of the universe, and the voice comes through, and they're presented with Torah. And as if at that moment they become proselytes in this new way. And then their first act is to create a space, a building within which to focus as proselytes how to worship this divine presence. And then next would be the design of the clothing. And then we have this episode that seems to be a kind of spiritual or moral hiccup among them of having kind of a backsliding and a crisis of faith, if you will. So that's one way to read it if one wants to read it in the chronological order in which it appears in the books that we all have in front of us. So I want to take us through an alternative way of reading it, and we'll look at a work of art that perhaps gives us a new way of thinking about what we've just read. So on our study sheet, number 1 is from one of the opening verses that seems to highlight what this Torah portion is all about. Let them make me a sanctuary that I may dwell among them, betocham, among them. And we'll come back to that Hebrew word in a little bit. So one way of understanding it is that this is all a continuous flow from presentation of a way of life, the instructions of how to live, and then the construction of a space, the design, clothing to be worn, and then a crisis of faith. However, there's another way to read it, and that's introduced by our medieval commentator Rashi, as well as extensive midrashim, early stories that are told by our rabbi sages. Once again, as what happened last week, Rashi is going to suggest that what we're reading is not the order in which things actually happened. So here's number 2 from Rashi. Earlier and later events are not presented in chronological sequence in Torah. The incident of the golden calf actually preceded the commandment of the work of the Mishkan by many days. So this is a curious thing. She's telling us that what we're reading now are things that will happen after what we'll read in 2 weeks. And his observation is backed up by an early midrash from a collection called Midrash Tanhuma. And they cite the verse, let them make me a sanctuary that I may dwell among them. And the midrash continues, when was this passage about the Mishkan said to Moses? They were spoken after the sin of the golden calf, even though they appear written before the narrative of the golden calf. Said Rabbi Judah in the name of Rabbi Shalom, the order of the Torah narrative is not necessarily chronological, as it is said from the book of Proverbs, her course meanders for lack of knowledge. So do the paths of the Torah and its narratives meander. What we will get from a reading of Rashi and various midrashim is that they are looking upon the project called the construction of the Mishkan as a therapeutic process, one that's designed to address human tendencies to seek out certainty, to seek out definition, to seek out ultimately control, and to avoid self-exploration and responsibility. And so they have in their minds, they see the incident of the golden calf as being a necessary kind of explication of those human tendencies to want to avoid self-exploration, to want to avoid responsibility, to lay it on something else. And so the Mishkan project then becomes a way of addressing those and redirecting those kind of tendencies into a higher purpose. But I'm curious though, when I looked at this quote from Proverbs that's in our Midrash, her course meanders for lack of knowledge. And then it says in the Midrash, so do the paths of Torah and its narratives meander. So what does this mean? Her course meanders for lack of knowledge. Does that mean the paths of Torah and its narratives meander because lack of knowledge? What does that mean? What's the lack of knowledge that somehow drives this meandering, non-chronological wanderings of Torah's inscriptions here? So we're going to look at a painting that I hope will give us another way to think about this. And this is a painting by Paul Klee. Before we look at the painting, just a few words about Paul Klee. Paul Klee was born in Switzerland about 1879. He dies about 1940. And he grew up in a family where both parents were deeply involved in music. The father was taught music at the university level. His mother was trained as a professional singer. And Paul Klee himself plays music from the age of 5 all the way through the rest of his life, primarily playing the violin. He eventually becomes interested in visual arts, and he becomes one of the most significant of the early 20th century artists to try and break down boundaries among the various art forms. He was interested in incorporating actual writing into his visual art on canvas. And he would often say that the way he understood art was through music and trying to find ways to incorporate what he experiences, rhythms and tonality, into his visual work. And he wrote a lot about art, and he said, I actually have it on number 6 in our study sheet, a line is just a dot that went for a walk. An active line on a walk, moving freely without a goal. This notion that you, as an artist, you place your brush on the canvas and a dab of paint comes onto the canvas, and it's as if it has a life of its own, and it starts moving across the canvas. And for Klee, that movement across the canvas doesn't have a predetermined end or direction. It's in search of something. And that in search of something seems to be critical to his whole notion of what it means to be engaged in a creative act. And he also said that art does not reproduce the visible, rather it makes visible. And he wrote again, said, today we reveal the reality that is behind visible things, thus expressing the belief that the visible world is merely an isolated case in relation to the universe, and that there are other, more latent realities. In his artwork, he was trying not to show us what we all see with our eyes in the material objective world. His artwork is in search of something that perhaps we can't readily see with our eyes in the objective world, another dimensions, other possibilities, and other truths. So with that, we look at our painting, and this is called Persian Nightingales. You see here our display of colors, our plums, our pinks, our roses. We have shapes, we have circles, we have crescent shapes, we have letters. On the left-hand side, we have an R, And on the left-hand side, we have an N. And all of it seems to be underneath the covering of a tent-like structure. So this particular painting of Persian nightingales was inspired by a poem by the 14th century Persian poet, Hafiz. And that poem is called The Beloved, and it includes these verses. Mortal never won to view thee, yet 1,000 lovers woo thee. Not a nightingale but knows, in the rosebud sleeps the rose. Hafiz's poem expresses a classic Persian dichotomy of earthly yearning and divine glory. The beloved's presence is hidden, but always present in the heart of the seeker. So now, looking at that painting, reading that poem, I begin to understand in a different way what we talked about last time about the long, shorter route that the Israelites are taking. If you remember, God decides not to direct the Israelites directly to the land of Canaan along the shortest, most direct route, which would be north and directly east, instead taking them down south in a long roundabout way, which is going to end up taking, according to our narrative, 40 years. So if we think of this creative act, this bit of color and shape that is now deposited onto a canvas, which begins to wander, which begins to meander, according to Paul Klee, without really knowing exactly where it's going and why, but somehow in search of what? In search of deeper meaning, perhaps in search, according to Hafiz, of one's beloved, knowing that even if one can't see one's beloved, one carries one's beloved with them. So there is, according to Klee, this act of meandering, of wandering across the canvas becomes a creative act to create a beautiful, meaningful work of art that reveals something that's apparently not visible, another dimension that we might not otherwise see. Perhaps another way of understanding this wandering that the Israelites are on, this defiance of chronological time, if you will, is that there's the work of art that's at stake here is the invention of a new self. And that invention of the new self is transformed by the search for one's beloved. So what is of also interest is some of the details that we read about in this week's portion. And I want to focus on just one aspect of it. And that's on the study sheet, number 3, where the instruction is, you shall make a menorah of pure gold. The notion of the material gold is a critical factor in 2 of the constructions that we'll read about. One we read about this week and one we're going to read about in 2 weeks. That is the Mishkan and the golden calf. Gold is centrally implicated in both of those construction projects. In one case, gold becomes the object of worship. In what we read today, the gold doesn't become the object of worship. It frames the space of worship. In the terms of the ark, the cover of the ark, the cherubim, it says, our text says, I'll meet you in between where those cherubims are. I'll meet you in between those gold pieces. And what's in between those gold pieces is a hollow, an empty space. That's where you'll find me. which is in, of course, great contrast to what gets produced with the golden calf. And what's fascinating, we'll read in a couple of weeks, Moses says to Aaron, what happened? How did this golden calf get made? What did you do? And Aaron said, all I did was receive gold from everyone, dumped it into the fire, and out came this calf. It is expressive of this complete lack of responsibility. And ultimately, that's what idolatry is all about. It's an avoidance of one's responsibility in the hopes that one can somehow control everything else around one. The other aspect, an element that goes deeply into both the Mishkan and the golden calf, is that of fire. Fire is essential to making the golden calf, and fire is essential to the design and the service that happens within the Mishkan. And we have this fascinating midrash here on number 3 that expresses Moses's response to the instruction to make a menorah. So let's read that. This is from Midrash Tanhum. 3 things gave Moses difficulty: the fashioning of the menorah, the laws of the new moon, and those about insects. What was the problem in fashioning the menorah? When Moses ascended the mountain, God showed him how to fashion the Mishkan. When he showed him how to construct the menorah, Moses had a difficulty. So God said, look, I'm fashioning it right in front of you. What did God do? He showed him white fire, red fire, black fire, green fire, and of them fashioned the menorah with its cups and knobs, its blossoms and 6 branches, and sent him, this is the work of the menorah, showing him with his finger. Nevertheless, Moses had difficulty. What is the difficulty that Moses is having? It seems, according to the Midrash, the difficulty is it's something that's made of fire, multiple kinds of fire. And Moses seems to have some kind of difficulty with manipulating or using fire to create something of substance. So what would be the cause of Moses having that difficulty? I think it goes back to Moses's first encounter with the source of all of existence. When he's had to flee Egypt, and he winds up in Midian, and he becomes a shepherd, and he's taking care of sheep. And as he's wandering, taking care of the sheep, he sees the bush. He sees a bush that's on fire, and yet it's not consumed. And it's his observation of that, his attention of that fire in the bush that's never consumed, that draws him away from his intended destination and causes him to hear the voice and to receive a commission having to do with an act of liberation. And so Moses seems to perhaps associate fire with something that is above and beyond what appears natural, something that is extraordinary, something that is more than just making a material object. And then if we move forward to the moment at Sinai, there is fire at Sinai. And it is that moment when that which cannot be seen, but definitely experienced, is associated with the fire that is happening. And that fire continues to be a companion to the people on their way. So the fire in Moses's eyes again, is associated with that which is not visible, but is profoundly present. And so he's having a hard time, perhaps, transferring that association with fire to something that can actually construct something that will be solid and stable and have texture and can be seen. So here is in number 4, a quote from French philosopher Gaston Bachelard, who wrote a lot about fire. And he wrote this: fire is the ultra living element. It is intimate and it is universal. It lives in our heart. It lives in the sky. It offers itself with the warmth of love, or it can go back down and hide, latent and pent up, like hate and vengeance. Among all phenomena, it is really the only one to which there can be so definitely attributed the opposing values of good and evil. In our text, we see fire that could be in the service of something that is tangible, firm, and static, the creation of a golden calf, which is expressive of the people's anxieties, their fears, their reluctance to take responsibility. And we've also seen fire in the service of mystery, of that which is intangible, of that which is dynamic and ever-changing. And it is as if Moses at this moment is like aware of this, like of these two possibilities for fire, to either be in the service of holiness and love, or of being in service of destruction and fear. So I go back to what Torah text from its very first word that we encountered months ago, all the way through. Torah text presents itself seemingly as finite and stable symbols we call words. But as we read that material deeply, we discover how unstable, how ambiguous that text is. And it becomes not a, if you will, clarifying light. It kind of flickers. It flickers, requiring a deep kind of vision to see what rests there. So I put that together with what Paul Clay is suggesting to us. This notion that to be transformed, to be a better person, one should rely on flickering light and a dot that moves, rather than something that's fixed and too luminescent and clarifying, if you will. I end on the study sheet with an excerpt from a poem by T.S. Eliot, Burnt Norton. It's a reflection on, if you will, the tension, the way Hafiz wrote, between one's desires for permanence and one's sense of mortality, one's pursuit of love, and one's acknowledgement of loss. At the still point of the turning world, neither flesh nor fleshless, neither from nor towards. At the still point, there the dance is, but neither arrest nor movement, and do not call it fixity, where past and future are gathered, neither movement from nor towards, neither ascent nor decline, except for the point, the still point. There would be no dance, and there is only the dance. With that, I'd love to know what you experienced as we read through this week's portion. Please, Norm. And go ahead and yes, thank you.
Yeah, I had to turn it on. So the flickering light is an interesting idea, that when the flickering light is on, then you can see and you can learn what there is. When the light flickers off, you have to think for yourself. I am troubled by Rashi and Rabbi Judah, who are quick to highlight Ein Mukdam ve'Ein Mu'achar b'Torah. There's no beginning and no end, and no beginning, no before and no after in Torah. Maybe the golden calf came before the Mishkan, and that's okay to say that. That's okay to make commentary on that. But I feel as if they've told half the story. That having said A, you have to say B. Okay, maybe the golden calf came beforehand, but why then does the Torah present the golden calf afterwards? Was someone confused? Did they get it wrong? Was someone up too late editing and they just put the wrong thing in the wrong order? I feel that that's missing. And I would entertain anybody's, maybe someone has an answer for that.
Great. It's so exciting. I love this. It's very rich what you just offered. Remember that what we're reading, at least what I'm looking at, is this: a book. A book has front cover and a back cover. It has pages and they flip like this, and you go from front to back. Our ancestors, and today we preserve that in our synagogue services, we did not read out of a book, we read out of a scroll that rolls. And I think that is a reminder of a different way of looking at things that roll as opposed to things that go from point A to point B. I also think what occurred to me this week is that I imagine that our ancestors in pre-modern times had a more comfortable way of experiencing time as something less linear than we moderns do. That they were more comfortable in seeing past, present, and future as somehow constantly interplaying with one another, and sometimes even existing simultaneously. That pre-modern way of experiencing time comes to a crashing end, thanks largely to Newtonian physics, which emphasizes a more deterministic approach to time. And that deterministic approach to time has its own undoing by the beginning of the 20th century with quantum mechanics, which begins to imagine that perhaps time as we know it and experience is not an innate quality and characteristic of the universe. And that has generated its most recent iteration in string theory, to suggesting that there are possibilities of parallel universes where multiples of us are existing simultaneously. So those are just kind of some thoughts that come to mind as a way of understanding Paul Clay's sense, if you will, of this is about movement, and it's about movement that, in a sense, we imagine that we're in control of, but we're not really. But let me bring in some other rich thoughts as well. Let me call upon some hands that are up, and I've got Richard here as well. So let me go to David, and I've got Rose and Robert and Catherine and Carl. So let's start with David and Susan.
So as we were reading through the Torah portion this evening, I turned to David as we were the description of the Mishkan and what they were to do and how they, were to do it. And I said, oh, this has to be after the golden calf because this is God giving them something to do so they are part of the process, so they are part of the thinking, that they are part of the religion, that it's not something that's imposed upon them from on high, or it's a golden calf that they follow. And then we found out that it wasn't that way, but it just seemed logical to me.
That's lovely. Thank you, Susan. And David, did you want to share as well? Okay, so let me call upon Rose. Go ahead, Rose. And you'll need to unmute, Rose.
Yeah, that's interesting, the time thing. But if you read the text closely, in chapter 25, verse 16, it talks about the pact, the tablets that I will give you, which means that the tablets were, and the golden calf episode, which occurs contemporaneously with the tablets, happened after, because it says that I will give you.
Okay.
So, yeah, so, you know, it makes a neat story to say, yeah, they, did this golden calf thing, and that the Mishkan is kind of like a way to heal the people after this horrible thing, kind of art therapy and community building and all that kumbaya stuff. But it sounds like, at least now, the actual building of the Mishkan may have taken place after the golden calf. But the instructions, the IKEA instructions, are being given at this point before the tablets have been given. And then the question is why, was the Mishkan underway when the whole thing with the tablets and the golden calf happened? If so, you would think that all the golden stuff that people were donating, where did they get the gold to make the golden calf then? Because you would have thought that all the gold stuff was, headed for the Mishkan. So more questions than answers.
Fantastic. Okay. And let me call upon Carl. Go ahead, Carl.
Yeah, this is a little bit reminiscent, at least for me, of the story by Kurt Vonnegut, Slaughterhouse-Five, where his character sort of becomes unstuck in time, and he tells an entire story, but you get the whole story without necessarily having it have to beginning, a middle, and an end. It jumps around, and yet you follow it fairly carefully. I wonder, because I don't think, I'm really new to this, so I may be a little bit off here, but I don't think the Torah was written extemporaneously. There's not a bunch of historians jotting this stuff down as it happens. This is all done sort of retrospectively. And I wonder if they also, because I don't think any idea is truly new, if Kurt Vonnegut had the idea, somebody else had it way before him about ideas of time not necessarily being this beginning, middle, and end, that they felt that this was a way of putting this together and to not be so bound by chronology in order to make the point that they're trying to make. And I until just now, I thought that the Kurt Vonnegut thing was the only thing about being unstuck in time, but you bring out this idea and it's like fascinating. That's
Oh, Carl, thanks for bringing Kurt Vonnegut. That adds a whole nother dimension to what we're talking about and what we're thinking about. So, Richard, would you like to share something?
One thing that made me recall is the business of when we lose somebody.
Cannot hear.
See, the business of when we lose somebody, child, a mate, a teen, the population, feels grief, but we still have that relationship And we still grow through that relationship. And there are people that I get emails every day offering to sell me gold. And we've heard the president say the person who has the gold makes the choices, makes the decisions. That bush is ever, ever, ever burning. It's very sorrowful. And it's made me feel that I felt for a long time that time does not have an ontology. It's nothing real. And that's what we're dealing with. And the idea of making a more perfect union, well, that would be the gold standard, wouldn't it? And maybe this is just the realm we're in. That is one of the pits that Weisenthaler says that heaven and hell share space, and we're maybe in some of that space. And what a wonderful school it is.
Thank you, Richard. And let me go call Robert. Please share with us.
Thank you again for a lovely evening. I really appreciated the prose you sent out on, I guess it was Tuesday. And anytime Hafez is in there, it's always wonderful. And the comments today, I think I just kind of overlap each other so well. In the Baha'i writings, it says, only the spirit is real. Everything else is as shadow. And a really good example of illusion, one moment of pain is longer than an hour's of pleasure. Anybody who's had excruciating pain knows that time expands. When you have a really wonderful time, time compresses. Everything we see is geared for this in our senses. Not real. It's a journey. Now, I'll get to the points I wanted to make. First of all, sheer genius. A line is just a dot going for a walk. That's right up there with Leonard Cohen's verse that I love. And every once in a while, in fact, the other day, I watched the dance scenes with his music. I loved it. Dance me to the end of love. He just eliminated one word with, and it changed it entirely. So that's right up there. That's absolute genius and creativity. As we started reading this right from the beginning, with the building of the Mishkan, the image I had was going from the unholy to the holy, from the journey of paganism to Judaism. So what are all the steps in between? All these steps that are very precise, just like the laws, very precise, no question about them. I think that is the how, symbolically, how we get from the unholy to the holy. Everyone on this screen is a moral, good person. I hear that in your voices and the things you share, in your goodness, all of those things. All we have to do is go to our neighbor, steal a few things, slap them in the face, God forbid. And where are we on that journey? It's like, oops, we didn't cover something with gold. And by the way, we fell in the mud. We can't, it's a problem. So I love the symbolism of it. And I think that's what I appreciate so much. And then it made me think, what is the journey of a child? It's from a purely animal nature as far as acquisition of virtues to hopefully till the day we die, when we have acquired virtues, honesty, truthfulness, generosity, compassion, all these others, right? From the unholy to the holy, from the animal condition to the spiritual condition. And I'm just going to play with fire. From the fire of self to the fire of the love of God. And I always enjoy these evenings. I look forward to them. Thank you.
We're very rich. Thank you, Robert. Thank you. And Catherine, please.
Okay. First, two asides, something resonated with me. We're entering the Lunar New Year of the fire horse. Yeah. So I like that resonance there um, in the Parshat. And the other thing is that this is a personal reflection. Um, when I was growing up, my French grandmother always called us her cherubims. And I didn't know what she was talking about until I read this Parshat. So every time I read it with great fondness because it takes me right back to my grandmother. Uh, but it was just my brother and I, and she's, anyway, that's apparently a French Jewish term of endearment. Um, but anyway, so whether or not this comes before the calf, I think one thing which I think is important is that this is something, this tabernacle cannot be realized at that moment, it seems. Not very practical to build it at that moment. And so it sort of indicates that before we build the tabernacle, we need to have the imaginary implanted within us that this tabernacle is possible. How do you build a sacred space? How do you build a space for sacred devotion? And so I think that works either way, whether it's before the calf or after the calf. Um, it's a source of inspiration for what one can build. And Adonai is sharing it with Moses. Um, so that sort of supercharges Moses' approach to the tablets, right? Because he can already imagine this sort of sacred space.
Catherine, the material that you presented, both the kind of the theoretical and material is very rich, and so I'm struck by the personal aspect that you shared with us. So this this image of you and your brother on either side of your grandmother, and somehow within that middle between you is like some kind of divine presence. It's like very, very powerful and beautiful. I'm glad that you carry that within your heart. Oh, David, would you like to share something, David? Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to say one thing in reaction, especially to Rose, but in general of what we're talking about. And that is if what I understood her to say, which is essentially that these instructions are given in tone of this is something you shall do in the future. And that if you follow chronologically to the golden calf before you actually go to work building the Mishkan, then I think that maybe the golden calf is a case of people reading a set of specifications like I used to write as an engineer and just panicking, doing something they knew how to do.
Yeah, thank you, David. And mechanicking and engineering, it all has its proper and helpful place in the world. And it's not the only thing, and neither is a purely spiritual approach the only thing. If you don't know how to direct water away from the home into a drain, you're in big trouble. So here's what you have all contributed to my greater understanding tonight is that we're reading a story about a sacred journey. And one of the lessons that jumps out through our conversation and our deep reading of this material is that the escape from physical external confinement is not the ultimate act of freedom. That once one is free, even once one is free of that external confinement, there are far more profound layers of restrictions and indeed enslavements that are occurring inside us. And that's what this long journey is about. That's why it wasn't meant, it wouldn't be helpful to take this very quick few-day journey from Egypt over to the land of Canaan. Because as we would be as people when we got there, we would have been carrying all that trauma and all that experience. And so we need to go on this much longer, meandering way in order to transform ourselves. And I go back now to understanding perhaps what the book of Proverbs and that Midrash is saying, that her course meanders for lack of knowledge, and so does the path of Torah, and its narratives meander. And somehow I'm hearing parenthetically, for lack of knowledge. What is the lack of knowledge? I think the lack of knowledge has to do with our assumptions of certainty, our presumptions that we know what is true, and our exclusion of not exploring other possibilities. So I think that lack of knowledge has to do with letting go of holding on to a sense of certainty. And that's what the golden calf, I think, represents. A desire to reclaim, to attach oneself to something that is certain, and thereby exclude questioning and doubt. And the path that we are on with the Israelites to becoming transformed into human beings of a higher level of responsibility, of self-sovereignty, of compassion, has to do with letting go of our holding on to absolute certainty, absolute sense of control, exclusion of any doubt and mystery. So it is a wandering that is best achieved when one is with others rather than one either by oneself, or a wandering that seeks to control and conquer and oppress others. So if we are going to be pigments of different colors placed on a canvas, wandering around in search of deeper meaning, I'm glad to be on a canvas with all of you. God bless you all. I look forward to our next gathering. Be well, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Thank
Rabbi.
you so much. Bye-bye.